I hope I won't disappoint you. I don't think there's too much linguistics here. And also there's only half a slide from ChatGPT, so if there are any complaints, you have to direct them towards me. Franz Pöchacker has given us the latest on the field, so I can venture into some more unexplored fields and areas. And as I said, complaints will have to go to me. The focus is, as you can see from this title, on intuition as setting us apart from the machines. Because as we know, AI by name and definition has intelligence. What distinguishes AI approaches from other kinds of computation is that they exhibit key aspects of behavior considered as intelligent in humans. And then you have a whole list showing us in what way AI should be considered to be intelligent. We don't have to go into that. It can replicate or enhance human perception, support humans in diagnosis, planning, scheduling, resource allocation and decision making, and cooperate physically and intellectually with humans and other AI systems. AI also has creativity. Creativity, according to Sandrini, is often characterized by the ability to recombine, reconceptualize, or transform existing knowledge within a given domain. This aligns closely with the observed functionalities of large language models, which leverage sophisticated pattern recognition and statistical analysis to generate novel, surprising, and potentially useful textual outputs, such as stand-up routines in the style of the late comedian George Carlin about the Silicon Valley bank failure. ChatGPT opined on Christian theology. It wrote poetry. It explained quantum theory physics to a child as though it were rapper Snoop Dogg. Other AI models generated visuals so compelling they have sparked controversy over their inclusion on art websites. Machines, at least to the naked eye, have achieved creativity. So we can say AI has intelligence, AI has creativity, and I want you to note one little point. Creativity builds on existing knowledge, on given data. Humans have intuition. We know of Einstein to have said, "The only real valuable thing is intuition." I believe in intuitions and inspirations. I sometimes feel that I am right. The intellect has little to do on the road to discovery. There comes a leap in consciousness. Call it intuition or what you will, and the solution comes to you, and you don't know how and why. So this is very different. There's something which comes from outside, from somewhere. And Kepler, interestingly, he says exactly the same thing. Kepler's third law of planetary motion came as an inspiration. As he writes himself in The Harmony of the World, he didn't want to believe it. I rejected it. And some weeks later, it came again and conquered the darkness of my mind. So differently from creativity, intuition does not rely on existing knowledge. It relies on something that comes from somewhere and we don't know how and why. Now, do we have to be an Einstein to have that kind of intuition that sets us apart from the machines? I have been following newspaper interviews with musicians, writers, for many, many years. I have collected them. I have a big stable of newspaper reports or interviews, and they seem to be making the same point. For instance, Konstantin Becker, he is a famous German songwriter, musician, singer. He says, "All of my poems and song texts never came out of thought or the intention to write a certain song, but they happened to me. As a result, my songs were always wiser than me. For instance, as a man, I was attached to partly gruesome role models while writing the most tender love songs. which greatly appealed to women, who then complained about the divergence between my songs and my lifestyle. I got annoyed, but they were right. I was not in sync with my songs, which one is very rarely anyways, because they come from a different space, those songs. When I write melodies, I never had the feeling I had composed them, but the feeling that something is coming my way, which had been there for long, and all I had to do was reach for it and grab it. Paul Auster, to name just one of many, many others, no one can say where a book comes from, least of all the person who writes it. So by contrast, the machine can only process what it already has and work only on given data, whereas humans, they can grab something out there, which they haven't even thought of or thought about. Now, what about the non-artists, the reproductive experts, the translators and interpreters who do not produce something novel, who reproduce what some other text producer, speech producer, or author said or wrote? Interestingly, highly seasoned translators and interpreters have similar experiences. In Leppi Halme, she analyzed a number of highly advanced literary and well-known literary translators, and they speak of a trance-like state of flow, of imagination, lateral thinking, experience, and a bit of luck, working almost on autopilot, tapping into the subconscious, virtually seeing the setting and characters and hearing the dialogue. In my own interview corpus, I interviewed some 12 highly advanced, seasoned interpreters, conference interpreters, and they said things such as, there are other smaller examples I can't think of at the moment, where you've produced a word that you didn't know you knew. It's not here, points to her head, but it's back here somewhere, points behind her head, or it's pulled up from the depth. Again, this kind of instinct, but as I said, that's one of those strange things that happen and there is no real explanation for it. Another interpreter said, I don't think anymore, I do it instinctively. You just have to be in the flow with it. One disappears as a person and enters the speaker, and I really enjoy when a verbal exchange runs through me like an electric current. I put my soul into it. I absorb the personality of the speaker to channel not just his words, but his personality and emotions. I get there by fast and feeling-based decision, because via the intellect it would take much longer. Maybe not a feeling, but an intuitive sense rather, a certain instinct for what is suitable in the situation. Such non-analytic, non-deliberate processes in interpreters and translators are akin to flow, to being in the zone, which refers to this particular dynamic state, the holistic sensation that people feel when they act with total involvement. In the flow state, action follows upon action, according to an internal logic that seems to need no conscious intervention by the actor. He experiences it as an unified flowing from one moment to the next, in which he is in control of his actions, and in which there is little distinction between self and environment, between stimulus and response, or between past, present, and future. Flow is what we have been calling the autotelic experience. The concept of flow refers to a state of being fully immersed in a task, such that this immersion is energizing. No cognitive load here. So flow is involvement, is immersion, is identification, is overcoming the subject-object divide. And we find this in all disciplines. Barenboim saying about his orchestra, they not only grasp but absorb the piece. That is a difference. In literature, Friederike Mayröcker, an award-winning writer, said, when I write, what I describe gets so close to me as if it was sitting here with me. I often cry when writing because I so empathize with everything, people, animals, whatsoever. I fully identify with it. I then am this thing. And then Christopher Scott Tennant, a very seasoned translator and translator trainer, he was asked, how do you translate? Well, you feel it, then you do it. So there is this intuitive something, and it is different from creativity. Creativity is suggesting that people are actively producing something in a deliberate way. Creativity, from Latin creare, to make, to bring forth, is deliberate, is intentional, is active, is thoughtful. Intuition, from Latin intuere, to look into, to contemplate, is non-deliberate, incoming, infalling, instinctive, not thinking anymore. And in interpreting, I was, of course, looking for something about intuition, and I couldn't find anything. In interpreting studies, we are very much in the social constructivist paradigm. So you find things like Musa Mercer talking about adaptive expertise, metacognition, deep knowledge structures, schemas, flexibility and creative problem solving that distinguish the merely skilled artisans from the highly competent virtuosos. This is firmly rooted in a cognitive constructivist foundation. So the premise being active, strategic, intentional processing, the construction, the word gives it away. You actively construct and build a mental representation. This is mainstream cognitive psychology framework. Translation studies has a little bit about intuition. Risco, very early on, she speaks about the essentially heuristic and intuitive translation behavior. But at the same time, she speaks of dynamically created strategies and each translation as a creative problem-solving experience. So you can see here, it's a bit about creativity, a bit about intuition. There is no real distinction. There is no real defining the one or the other. Chiarelli, he took this up and he brought this into a more emergentist, inactivist line of thinking. And he says his approach does not view, or this approach, which he kind of developed further, does not view the mind as if it were a largely mechanical computer-like machine, but instead emphasizes complexity, where cognition is conceived of as an embodied, socially situated and inactive process. We've heard this also from Franz. An unpredictable, only partially controllable constellation of memories, learning results, and intuitions, which takes us a little further into an emergentist way, which actually leaves space for something like intuitions. And he clearly says that his turn towards emergentism is a way of further developing his earlier social constructivist approach. So it is not a kind of complete going from one paradigm to the other, but it is kind of a further development. I found a very interesting quote by Gary Massey, where you can see that the two paradigms are interlinked, the social constructivist one and the emergentist inactivist one. And he refers back to the Dreyfus brothers. The Dreyfus brothers are actually the ones who launched the discourse surrounding human and artificial intelligence with the seminal work, Mind Over Machine, the power of human intuition and expertise in the era of the computer. And they say only with greater human experience comes know-how, a far superior, holistic, intuitive way of approaching problems that can be imitated, that cannot be imitated by rule-following computers. And later on, Stuart Dreyfus spoke of the primacy of situational, experience-based know-how as being closely associated with embodiment, in explicit contradiction to disembodied artificial intelligence. And then Gary Massey says the Dreyfus model broadly squares with key findings from expertise research, so Erickson, Shreve, etc., and leading models from embodied, embedded, enacted, extended, and effective 4EA cognition. 4EA is the kind of model that is trending in translation studies, as it were. Now, the fact that there is some overlap here, some coming together, some non-distinction between the two paradigms, or I mean, they are distinct in a certain way, but there is also some overlap. This is not surprising because they are both rooted in a joint work, that of Maturana and Varela. And if you have heard of the work of Maturana and Varela, it's fascinating stuff. And they speak of the principal coupling of agent and environment. They have brought up all these basic principles of not only constructivism, but especially of emergentism and enactivism, of organisms enacting the world by a process of auto-constitution, etc., etc. And they are taking it away from Chomsky's competence being activated in performance. So when we look at it from this cognitive constructivist point of view, we think that we have our knowledge, our competence, and then we activate it. We activate the schemas, we activate the knowledge structures while performing. And this takes us away into a more a way where the embeddedness is more focused upon, is more emphasized. The cognitive processes also being influenced by cooperative partners, artifacts, task specifications, and individual factors. All that is there in both paradigms. But the idea being that they want to move away from radical constructivism. Radical constructivism sees the black box, the human mind, as hermetically closed off. And you can only construct things and see things within your mind. I think he likened it to this kind of being in the midst of a storm, where you can, or being a pilot who can only see through his cockpit tools and can't see any further than that. And in this approach, emergentism, there is more permeability, and it's going away from this idea that the brain is a closed-off black box. So emergentism leaves space for intuitive ideas and an inspirational unfolding, and this is what then was taken up by Chiarelli. So knowledge is no longer an accumulative process, but emerging in a self-creating manner. Situatedness is no longer individuals being inserted like an actor on a stage into a fixed and static situation, but a function of collaborative being in the world. Strategies are no longer applied, but created dynamically through the immersion in the complexity of each new translational situation. This is to say that there is a difference, but the difference is like in nuances. There is a kind of opening up, there is a kind of making it a little bit more emergent, but the principles are very much the same because, as I said, both paradigms are rooted in the same kind of joint word. This can also be seen when we look at the notions of intuition which you find in the literature. In the literature, intuition is understood to be based on extraction of prior rational experience, is automatic routine recognition of familiar patterns, association heuristics. The bright blue stands for the intuitive dimension component. The red part stands for the rational component, and the blue stands for the experience-based, prior experience part. So in these definitions, you will always find there is a bit of all three. There is a bit of intuition, there is a bit of rational thought, there is a bit of prior experience. So Chiarelli speaks of intuition as visceral impressions that comprise abduction from experiences. Then there is sudden recognition of familiar patterns, irrational process with rational basis, automatic subconscious recombination of information. And here's where I did my ChatGPT research, because I felt, what about the experience of an Einstein and all those others who say that what they experience has nothing to do with their prior knowledge, what is there on them, and they elaborate on that. It is somewhere coming from outside. This experience is not covered in those, is not captured in those definitions. So I did my ChatGPT search to see, if there is anything in the literature out there which captures it and which covers it. And you go into Kahneman and Gigerenzer and System 1 and 2, etc. And all you find is intuition being not a single process, but an umbrella term covering several mechanisms: fast pattern recognition, effective tagging, learned heuristics. Again, it is all about, you have a knowledge base, and then you have these aha moments which take what you have and give you a fast, sudden recognition of familiar pattern. Then you recombine it a little bit, and then you come to some insight which you think, wow, this is a revelation. But instead, it's nothing but what creativity does: recombine what is already there. So if intuition is only that, if it only works on the basis of prior knowledge and the recombination of given information, then we have no chance. Then the machine will always do better than us. Then we can just leave it all to the machine, because the machine does exactly that. It takes what it has and does this recombination of familiar pattern, etc. So what about these other, I say, the Einstein experiences? But as I told you, this is something which all experts experience on a more or less, it's not always on a genius level, but it's there with all the experts. What about those experiences? They are not, as I say, in the covered by literature definitions and descriptions. So in the literature, there's always this rational component, and it seems to be quite strong. So how strong actually is it? When you look at Ray Chekhondov, he's quite a famous psycholinguist, in his User's Guide to, not to the Galaxy, to Thought and Meaning, Chekhondov concludes that thought and meaning must be almost completely unconscious. What we experience as rational conscious thought, which we prize as setting us apart from the animals, but nowadays we need something setting us apart from the machines, in fact rides on a foundation of unconscious intuition. Rationality amounts to intuition enhanced by language. Whatever advantages rational thought offers, it still relies on a grounding in intuitive thinking. So according to Chekhondov, rationality is only the tip of the iceberg. Everything else is intuition. The iceberg is intuition. So how do we get at the iceberg? How do we go beyond the tiny little tip of the iceberg? We think our intellect, our ratio, our rational thinking is, wow, makes us the crown of the creation. But that is only a tiny little bit of the real thing. So how do we get at the real thing? Since I could not find anything in the literature, in the Western views, it is my contention that we need an intertraditional approach to go beyond the tip of the iceberg. I suggest the model of Sri Aurobindo. Sri Aurobindo is one of the greatest figures of India of the 20th century. He's also a Cambridge scholar, a freedom fighter, all kinds of things. He has written the longest poem in the English language, but that would be going too far. Anyways, he says, in order that the understanding may not interfere with our attainment to real knowledge, we have to cultivate a power exceedingly difficult for the active intellectual thinker and distasteful to his proclivities, the power of intellectual passivity, the power of dismissing all thought, the power of the mind to think not at all. This is a hard saying for the Occidental mind, to which thought is the highest thing, and which will be apt to mistake the power of the mind not to think, its complete silence, for the incapacity of thought. But this power of silence is a capacity and not an incapacity, a power and not a weakness. It is a profound and pregnant stillness. So according to Sri Aurobindo, you have to go via intellectual passivity to come to these non-mental intuitive mind levels where these inspirations and revelations are possible. Now this may sound a little bit esoteric, so I have to give you some indications that this may be plausible. One indication is that interpreting as situated cognition is extremely well established. It's based on a very substantial body of work in psycholinguistics, in cognitive science, etc. I did at the time, I studied intensely the Kinch van Dijks and the Johnson Lairds and the Brown and Ewells of the time in the 1980s who ushered in the cognitive turn. And we can say with a lot of certainty that interpreting is a matter of situated cognition in terms of there is there is a top-down, bottom-up interaction of information coming in from the situation, the text, all kinds of influencing factors from the situation, the participants, etc., the wider social-cultural context. It being different if you have a conference in Japan or in Hungary, that all influences your coherence building, your comprehension, etc. And then from long-term memory, you have a lot of knowledge, etc. All of this is being influenced by strategy, skills, requirements, motivation, and this is processed in the interpreter's working memory, as is any type of language processing in the working memory of the interlocutor, and then this leads to the construction of a mental representation on different levels of deeper and less deeper processing, the language surface structures, the propositional text space, and the mental model. So this part, as I said, is very well established. It is, of course, a cognitive constructivist model, and it fits perfectly into the model of Sri Aurobindo of the multi-layers of mind. According to Sri Aurobindo, and as also Ray Checkendorf said, the intellect, the rational part, is not what makes us the crown of the creation, is not the highest thing we can achieve. It is just the lowest level. It is just the thing that leads us astray. It is what makes us do all the madness in the world, because anything goes. It's like a marketplace. You can argue for anything or against anything. So the mental level is knowledge by acquisition, it's understanding, it's indirect understanding via senses, processing, relative thinking, analysis, logic, interpretation, separation of subject and object. And my levels of processing model, cognitive constructivist, fits beautifully into it and is very well established. Now, this is what people do, this is what we all do. Now, an Einstein and a Mozart, they would be processing or doing their thing and their achievements on the intuitive and overmind levels, where there is knowledge by direct contact, where there is not an understanding but an overstanding, whereas there is immediate synthesis, unity of knowledge, and where there is the intuitions, revelations, and inspirations. You also have the supramental level, knowledge by identity. We can leave that aside for the moment because that is reserved to the very few highly, the true yogis, but that is unreachable almost. So we don't need to worry about this, but the point about this is that the layers, there are not only 3 layers of mind. This is just to make it a little bit clearer. There are many layers of mind. But they are permeable, so we can tap into our intuition. We can tap into those intuitive levels of mind. And we can have intuitions, revelations, maybe not on a genius level, but on the level of the experts that we were talking about at the beginning with their observations and statements. This is one indication of the plausibility that this cognitive constructivist perspective fits beautifully into that model. There is another one there's evidence from neuroscience. There is a wonderful TED talk by Charles Lim. He is not only a neurologist and skull surgeon, he's also a musician, and he puts jazz musicians into the neuroimaging tube. He gives them a keyboard and he has them improvise. And he can show on the brain images that when they improvise, when they are in that state of grace known as being in the zone, one part of the prefrontal cortex of the brain, which is involved in conscious self-monitoring, self-inhibition and evaluation of right and wrong, shuts down. And another part of the prefrontal cortex, the medial prefrontal cortex, involved in self-expression, turns on. So he gives you all these brain images where you can see this very nicely. So different brain areas are activated in intuitive states. There is also a lot of evidence from brain imaging from meditators. It be it mindfulness meditation or any other meditation. They have sent Buddhist monks, etc., and you can show the differences in the brain of what happens in meditators as opposed to non-meditators. There is plenty of evidence of gray matter increase through meditation. There are structural and functional brain differences in meditators versus non-meditators, whatever meditation that be. Meditators are found to be less reactive to self-criticism and self-praise on the neural level, and subjectively reported being less affected by either. So there's neurological evidence. There is the evidence that our well-established models fit beautifully into those intertraditional models. So I think there's a lot to go for it. And the question is, why is this being ignored? From what I see, I think we are working with simplistic views. For instance, consciousness, I'm always stunned when I hear researchers also in T&I speak about consciousness as being identical with the current content of the working memory. That's, for me, that seems so superficial. I mean, if you look at panpsychism, consciousness is a primordial property of matter. All matter contains consciousness. Or in quantum physics, consciousness is a high-speed sequential flow of awareness subjected to relativity, etc., etc. It's much more complex than the little bit we are aware of in our working memory at the present moment in time. Similarly, intuition, as I said, the traditional approach does not capture the experiences of all these experts who report about what they are getting into. Similarly, embodiment in the 4EA translation models or in interpreting, it's meant to be the body's interaction with the environment, constituting or contributing to cognition. I mean, this is such a platitude. Embodiment, real embodiment is mind and body alignment, and that goes far, far, far beyond our notions of embodiment. It brings in all the experience, feeling, identifying, and this is exactly what these guys report. They identify, they become one. If you are in the flow, you become fully one with the thing, or as MICHAELA said, she becomes one with the thing she is talking about and writing about. So it goes way beyond. There are calls for intuition in translator and journalist training. Chesterman says students should not only learn about processes and strategies, but develop self-confidence to be able to tap into their intuition. We need to give them the experience of flow plus the experience of self-monitoring. Daniel Perrin, who is the head of our School of Linguistics, says it should be possible to enable, encourage, and use emergence systematically. Students should be taught to take their time, open up, let ideas and creative thoughts come in. Let Einfälle is a beautiful German word for infallings. We don't really have this in English. For emergent solutions, rise from the dynamic embeddedness for the journalist of the journalistic working environment. There are these calls. So how do we cultivate this capacity which we have to tap into our tuition, to go into those other levels of mind which are accessible to us? Otherwise, all these experiences would not be possible. I would like to refer to a chapter by Julie Johnson in the Routledge Handbook of Conference Interpreting, which I edited with Elisabeth Tiselius. And Julie Johnson says, interpreting flows most effectively when the interpreter is in a more receptive than active mental state and relying on a balance of intuitive and rational decision making. And mindfulness training is just one example. There can be others. I'm mentioning this because it is very well documented in this particular chapter. And interestingly, I was talking to Edina Robin yesterday, and she said they have had mindfulness training for their interpreters for 2 years, and the students have very positive experiences in terms of stress resilience, etc. And Julie Johnson, who wrote her PhD on this in Monterey, they have been doing mindfulness training with their interpreter students for a long time. Mindfulness, but it's only one example. You can do other things. Mindfulness is the awareness of what one is experiencing in the present moment with an attitude of acceptance and non-judgment, cultivated through meditation, which is purposely being still and dropping into one's body and truly aligning mind and body. Johnson speaks of substantial evidence of physical, cognitive, emotional, and behavioral benefits. Interpreters who go through in the mindfulness training group gain a sense of agency, self-regulation of attention and emotion, strengthening of domain general abilities, awareness of stresses and own internal reactions. They can then take adaptive measures. They are more focused and calmer. And then they perform better. Okay, so this brings me to my conclusions. Humans have to excel to stand up to the machine. Digitalization or AIization, just like industrialization, will do away with many jobs also in T&I and leave room mainly for those who can do what the machine cannot do, or who can at least do better what the machine can do. Superior expertise relies on stillness, passivity, poise, empathy, and becoming one. It goes beyond deliberate practice, talent, and metacognition. One does not have to be a genius, but develop one's receptive capacity, receptive, not active, in order to tap into the intuitive faculties by turning inside, aligning mind and body, identifying and being in sync with what one is doing, feeling, and experiencing. Mainstream theoretical frameworks may not be adequate or may be inadequate. Thank you.